Deputy Merritt is working now and you are good to commence. Thank you.
Okay, I have a report from a planner, and the recommendation is that the application for minor variance from comprehensive zoning bylaw 75-2006 is hereby granted, subject to the conditions. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Stack, seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Myatt. And then I'll ask the question. I'll read the conditions and then ask the question. Subject to the following conditions. Number one, that the decision applies only to the proposed development as indicated on Schedule A attached to and forming part of this decision. And number two, that the owner provide an archaeological assessment that is included engagement with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation in accordance with its process and standards, has been completed by an archaeologist licensed in the province of Ontario, and has been confirmed by the appropriate ministry to have been accepted into the Ontario Public Register of Archaeological Records or Reports, and that the owner satisfy the chief building officer for the town of Saugeen Shores that the recommendation of the archaeological assessment, if any, has been or will be implemented. Any comments, questions? All those in favor? The minor variance is granted. The next minor variance, it's another public meeting for minor variance application A-1, and the applicant's name is Espa. The address is 136 North Shore Road. And again, this is a public meeting. We'll first ask the planner to make the report. Karina.
Yes, thank you again, Madam Chair, through you. I am presenting on behalf of my colleague Jillian Smith. That is an application for minor variance at 136 North Shore Road. You can see the property highlighted in red in this instance, and the context of the site being its single family homes in the area. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this application is to seek two minor variances for an accessory structure. One is to reduce the rear yard setback from 4.5 meters to 1.8 meters. And the second is to increase the permitted height from 5 meters to 5.7 meters. And this is to facilitate the construction of a breezeway between the existing primary dwelling and the existing accessory structure on the property. Next slide, please. So this is a site plan which shows the property. North is, you can see the north arrow just at the top of the page. So there is an existing home and an existing accessory structure on the property. The applicant is looking to construct a breezeway between the two, which would allow access from the elements. It would be an open breezeway, but it would provide cover from the elements when they're accessing the accessory structure. The setback, as you can see at the back of the property, is an existing condition. It is 1.83 meters. And then the height is also an existing condition as well. But with the addition of the breezeway, it did trigger the variance requirement. Next slide, please. So we did include a couple of photos of the property for some context. So this is taken from the road looking towards the existing home and accessory structure. Next. And this is taken from the back of the property looking towards the road. Next. And so we did review the applications in the context of the 4 tests for a minor variance. We did find that they do satisfy the 4 tests and that the application is minor. Next slide, please. We did circulate to various agencies and departments. We did receive comments back from various groups, including the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, the town, the historic Saugeen Métis, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, who have requested a completion of an archaeological assessment, which has been included as a condition on the application. We also received a public comment from a neighboring property owner expressing some concerns and wanting to ensure that the accessory building would continue to be treated as an accessory structure, specifically as it relates to height and other matters. Next slide, please. So just to recap, the minor variance is to facilitate a reduced rear yard setback and increased height. And approval would facilitate the construction of a breezeway between the two structures that currently exist on the property. Staff are recommending approval of the application, subject to the conditions on the decision sheet. Concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I believe Mr. and Mrs. Espa are in the chambers with us. Would you like to speak? Okay. He's indicated, they have indicated that they are present, but they're choosing not to speak, but are available to answer questions. I believe that Deb and Wayne Kaufman are attending the meeting by Zoom, and Mr. and Mrs. Kaufman, would you like to speak?
Can you hear us okay?
Turn your video on.
Can't hear you, Deb.
Bottom. You're not muted. On the bottom. Can you hear us now?
Can you hear us?
Yes, it sounds good now.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple of questions. The rear yard setback is going, you're looking at 1.8. That rear yard setback is just behind the accessory building. That is not for the entire length of the lot.
That's a question?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Ms. Smith?
Yes, thank you through you, Madam Chair. So that would be for the accessory structure. It would not apply to other structures should they look to build other structures on the property. It is for what is currently shown on the site plan only.
Thank you very much. If the breezeway is enclosed, does that change the status of the build
Oh, the accessory.
of the accessory building?
I do perhaps defer to town staff on interpretation of that.
We'll ask Jay Posner.
Yes, and if it does change the status, it would make it a part of the main building. Would have to seek further relief to facilitate that. And just by way of, if I may continue later this evening, council is considering a zoning bylaw amendment that helps with interpretation on these types of issues. So we're putting this one in front of committee now because we don't know how committee or how council will consider the zoning bylaw, but just for your awareness.
I guess my question is then, if the breezeway is ever enclosed, then possibly it is considered one unit and it could go up to a height of 35 feet, 1.8 meters from the rear lot.
And Madam Chair, yes, they would have to seek further relief from this committee. And would have to consider whatever proposal that is to enclose the breezeway. And there may be other provisions of the bylaw coverage. I'm not sure what else could be affected by that.
So they'd have to go through another variance in order to do that.
Under current bylaw, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. We just wanted to indicate that we did really appreciate that our concerns and some of the conditions that we had were listened to, and from what we're hearing right now are being met. We were concerned about that 1.8 variance at the back of the property, and you've clarified that it's just strictly behind the accessory building and it will remain an accessory building with the breezeway. Excuse me. That was one of our concerns because it looks right out the front of our property. That's where we have an 18-foot window in our living room, as well as our deck is looking toward that area as well. So we just didn't want to have a solid wall along the property, but you've satisfied that for us, I believe.
So just to clarify, the height restriction will remain as an accessory building, which is applied for 5.7 meters. And the setback will be strictly for the accessory building of 1.8 meters, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That's good. We have no objections to it then.
Thank you.
I was remiss because I know where you live. Normally when members of the public speak, we ask you to give your name and your address. For the record.
Deb and Wayne Kaufman, we live at 36 Cutter Road.
Thank
Saugeen.
Are there any, are you done, Deb?
Yes, as I said, I think that our concerns were addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public in attendance who would like to speak? Seeing none, then I'll open it up to the question for comments or questions. Counselor Stack?
So similar question to the last time. I guess maybe two questions. Why is this just part of the planning process? Why they have to go through an archaeological assessment? Because I think I know the property. I've eyed it up before. It's already it's already built in. They're developing on top of the existing property. So unlike the first one where they've added to the ground, so is there? I guess so. Is it the response that's part of the planning process, and then what's the cost associated with this requirement? Sure. So I can try and answer the first question at least. So through you, Madam Chair, what we circulate all applications to First Nations, and we use a screening tool when we first receive an application to identify areas of high archaeological potential. And so we do flag early on if we see there's a potential requirement, either as part of a complete application for submission of the archaeological assessment, or we flag to proponents that through circulation to First Nations that they may also request that through the process. And so in this instance, we did circulate it. We did receive the comment back from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. I would highlight that even though the county does have a screening tool to assist with determining areas of high archaeological potential, we, through discussions with our counterparts at the Environment Office for Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, that they do have other areas that are above and beyond that screening tool. And so they will on occasion flag instances where they feel an archaeological assessment is warranted. And this was an example of that. In terms of the cost, it varies in terms of the size of the property and scope. It can be I think as low as like $1,000 plus, depending, like I said, on the scope of the study and the area that needs to be determined whether, and by that I mean, is it in a woodlot? Is it an open field? There's certain different requirements depending on the site characteristics. So thank you. I think, I appreciate, I'm just, again, this is maybe new to me. I just want to be careful that we're not applying standards on an existing property unless, because I'm not clear what's the scope of the assessment? Or is it just along the land immediately, sort of on either side? I think there's a deck or something, some sort of walkway that exists. So is it on is the expectation that it's on the entire property or just in the area that works? I would say currently what we're finding is that the assessment would be for the entirety of the property unless that property is quite large or there's areas that are going to be untouched through the development. And so in some cases they may be scoped. In this situation, I'm not sure, perhaps the applicants may have already had that discussion with their consultant for the scope of that study.
Vice Deputy Mayor Myatt.
Madam Chair, I just wondering through you to, well, perhaps the owner can answer this question. I had a question of Karina too, but the archaeological, I had the same question around the assessment process. And did the garage come long after the house was built, or was the garage built at the same time as the house was built? And was there an archaeological assessment done when the house was built, or did you buy it from another party?
We'll ask the applicant, Maria Esbot, to respond.
Hello. We bought the property 2 years ago. The house and garage were built in 2005. 2 years ago, we bought it. We put an addition onto the existing garage at the back of the garage last year.
Do you know if there was an archaeological assessment done when that house was built?
There's no record of it that I know of.
I just, anyways, I guess the assessment's been done.
No, it
Not
hasn't,
yet.
but they've assured me
But they
that
requested
later
it.
this week it will be done.
Yeah, I just, I, from a county standpoint, Korean, about pushback, but this is joining two buildings together. And I just think these archaeological assessments, and I know in certain areas they have to be done, absolutely requirement. But I'm just wondering how much discussion happens with SON, Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, when this kind of an application comes forth about the necessity to complete an assessment for this kind of development. It just seems it just seems a little bit far-fetched for me to have to require such an assessment for this kind of a breezeway. So is there room for discussions, negotiations at all, Karina, when these things, when these applications come up, or are they pretty much mandatory?
Yes, thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair. Typically what happens, like I said, is we would screen the property to determine, is it in an area of high archaeological potential? And then the next kind of step, if it does fall within that area, we would look at whether or not the site's been disturbed in the past, if there's existing development, what the nature of the proposal is, to determine whether or not we require that archaeological assessment as part of a complete application. In this case, we did circulate it, recognizing that this was a breezeway that was to be constructed between the two structures. It was through circulation to the First Nations that we did receive the comment back. And on other similar examples, I wasn't part of the discussions on this particular file, but in other files, we do have that discussion with the staff at the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation to ascertain what information they're relying upon, their particular interests or sites in proximity to this, to better understand what their request is and to see if we can perhaps scope that in any way. In this case, we also have the applicants, we flag it to them to see if they have any concerns with progressing with that assessment. And in this case, the applicants were willing to have that completed, and that will form part of the record for this area, just their property, but can be used by other archaeologists working in the area to identify any recommendations stemming from that report.
That's fine. It just seems for me a bit of a stretch. And I just wonder if any of these files are negotiable at all, given these circumstances for each file. That's all. So, but it's been requested, it's going to be done. I guess we'll proceed that way. But in terms of the causeway in this application, Madam Chair, I think the neighbors, the residents, the Coffins have spoke, and their concerns have been addressed, and we'll certainly be supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Espa. Any other
If
questions?
I may just say, the question came up. Our estimate is $6,700.
Thank you, Mr. Espa. What other, Member Zimmerman?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. First a comment and then a question likely to Mr. Posner. My comment, I just want to acknowledge the applicant's willingness to proceed with that. I think it's really important given where we live and the intent of our acknowledgement at the beginning of the meetings and why Saugeen Ojibwe Nation maybe asked for those. But I also hear the concerns that will go both with the costs and with what our minor variances. So certainly a lot of perspectives to consider there, and the questions or comments have obviously been important. My question is, I'm just seeking some clarification. Mr. Posner mentioned about a meeting later tonight to consider to put situations like this before another committee, as I understood it, and he can certainly clarify. I just want to make sure that since we did have a concern noted from a neighbor, that it's not anticipated that anything would change as a result of tonight's meeting that may impact the position of the neighbors who we heard from, Mr. and Mrs. Kaufman.
Yes, thank you. No, I don't think anything changes from the proposal that's coming forward. What we're proposing through bylaw to council, and Karina will be presenting that report, is a provision that provides clarification for staff, landowners, and all that use the zoning bylaws, so that when a breezeway is proposed, they know how it's to be treated. The specific circumstances of this file because the existing accessory structure didn't comply with two provisions of the bylaw, they still had to get the variance. So the types of concerns that would be coming up that were expressed would still need to be considered through the zoning bylaw, even if council approves the breezeway. So it removes a process headache. That's the idea, and provides clarity to landowners and applicants and the community. But it certainly still allows for opportunity from community members to provide input.
Thank you.
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, just to add to that, as part of the housekeeping amendment that would be presented to Planning Committee this evening, there is also a proposed increase in height for accessory structures, and that would be from 5 meters to 6 meters. So that would, had this application come in later and that change been accepted by council, they would not require a variance for height because the proposal is 5.7 meters.
Vice Deputy
I
Mayor
just
Myatt.
have one follow-up question, if I might, to you, to the, to the owner. Just curiosity really for the breezeway. How far are you going down? There's obviously footings. Are you going down 3-4 feet? 3 footings, or what, how far deep into the ground are you going? That's just my own, this assessment.
There'll be 2 piers at the front of the garage that get augered into the ground 4 feet deep.
Okay,
That's it.
the 2 holes,
It just screw
Yeah,
augers into the
gotcha.
ground.
So about 4 feet, 2 of them?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other comments, questions? Okay, we have a report before us from the planner that the recommendation is that the committee approve minor variance A -2023-001 SBA has attached subject to the conditions on the decision sheet. I would like a mover and a seconder. Counselor Stack and member Darlington Smith. I'll read the conditions that are on the sheet, and then we'll take a vote, or we'll have any questions or concerns further addressed. The conditions noted on the sheet are that any future development on the property conforms to the provisions of the zoning bylaw. Number 2, that the decision applies only to the proposed development as indicated on Schedule A, attached to and forming part of this decision. Number 3, that the minimum rear yard setback for the accessory structure is to be 1.8 meters. Number 4, that the maximum permitted height for the accessory structure is to be 5.7 meters. And number 5, that the owner provide an archaeological assessment that has included engagement with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation in accordance with its process and standards, has been completed by an archaeologist licensed in the province of Ontario, and has been confirmed by the appropriate ministry to have been accepted into the Ontario Public Register of Archaeological Reports. And finally, that the owner satisfy the chief building official for the town of Saugeen Shores that the recommendation of the archaeological assessment, if any, has been or will be implemented. Are there any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is approved. Our third public meeting is another minor variance application A-12. The name on the file is John Steinberg. The address is 34 Bell Road, and I will invite the planner to make her report.
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I am presenting again on this minor variance on behalf of my colleague Jillian Smith. So the applicant in this case is seeking a minor variance to allow for an increase in height for an accessory structure. You can see the property shown in blue on the site plan and the surrounding context, which includes single family or single detached dwellings or cottages in this area. Next slide. So as noted, the applicant is seeking to increase the height of an accessory structure, more specifically a garage, which would increase the height from 5 meters, which is currently required in the zoning bylaw, to 6.7 meters. This is a site plan. It shows the existing single detached dwelling on the north side of the property. There is an existing deck on the site, and the proposed garage is shown in the hatched shaded area on this site plan. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed front elevation of the proposed structure. Next slide. and some photos of the property. This is looking from the driveway, looking into the property. Next slide. This is looking from the rear property towards the road. And from the interior side yard or the side of the property looking towards the existing single family. So we did review the application in the context of the 4 tests. We found that it does satisfy all 4 tests and the application is minor and does represent good planning. Next slide, please. We also did circulate this to agencies and received feedback from the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, the town staff, as well as the historic Saugeen Métis and the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. There were no comments or concerns expressed on the application. Next slide. I would also note that we received no public comment on this application as well. So just to recap, this is a minor variance to increase the height of the accessory structure from 5 meters to 6.7 meters, and the approval would facilitate the construction of a detached garage. The application, we are recommending approval of the application subject to the conditions on the decision sheet. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe there are any members of the public wishing to speak, and the applicant, I don't believe, is in attendance. And seeing that, are there any comments, questions from the committee? I just want to ask one thing first. One of the items we received was the garage plan in the packages we got. The height is noted on that as being 7.5 meters. Can you just clean up or clear up the confusion or clarify what that means in
Yes,
relation to the application? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. And that's a good point that I did not raise in my presentation. The application originally came in requesting a height of 7.5 meters, and that's to the peak of the structure. The definition in the zoning bylaw is the mean height between the eaves and the peak. And so it was clarified through the building department that the requested variance should be for 6.7 meters as opposed to the height to the peak, which is what is shown on that plan.
Thank you. Any comments, questions by step?
Yeah, just through you to Karina. So Karina, in this situation with an archaeological assessment, it was determined because of low archaeological risk factors that attached garage and footings into the ground, it's a low risk for any artifacts. So so just explain one more time the determination, how that's made for this area versus the last one.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. It was identified as potentially being within an area of high archaeological potential and was circulated to the First Nations. They did review the application and in this context had identified no concern with the application. I don't know the full rationale for that, but we can certainly look into that further.
Just a question of clarification. It's a topic for another day. I think there's got to be some consistency, that's all. But I'm sure council will discuss it another time. Thank you.
Member Zimmerman?
Through you, Madam Chair. I wonder if I could get some insight. So it appears to me that the request is for about an increase of 30%. And I know the 4 questions related to whether it's a minor variance or not. Is there sort of a specific number that people are considering when they're making these recommendations as it relates to the request and what an appropriate percentage is in terms of looking at it and maintaining the recommendation as a minor variance?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Typically, we do review each application in the context of the site itself and the surrounding area, as well as a review of the 4 tests. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a numerical value or something that would trigger necessarily a staff response either in the positive or the negative. It really depends on the site context. Jillian did outline kind of all those requirements and responses to the 4 tests in the report. I would also note in the context of this site, having done the site visit myself, the surrounding properties, that's all very well treed. And so, and somewhat larger properties than some others that we've come across, particularly in the shoreline area. And so the impact to adjacent landowners was determined to be minor in this case. And again, the town is also considering as a housekeeping amendment, increasing the height of accessory structures as well from the current approved, which is 5 meters up to 6 meters. And a lot of that is in the context of allowing for additional residential units on top of garages. And so allowing for that height to still be within the context of the residential nature of the area and still shorter in height than the primary structures, but in keeping with kind of that residential context.
Anything further? Anything further, Chad?
Part of this application is also for residential, 30 square meters of it. That's correct.
Sorry, I didn't catch the first part of the
So
question.
part of this is for garage structure and 30 square meters was for residential. Was that correct? Did I read that?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question fully. It is,
I would suggest, based on my readings, is the top part, is there an intent to have a residential area up there of 30 square meters? Because I thought that was what I read in the application. Just trying to make sure.
at this point, I'm not aware of the applicant's intent in this particular property to have that for an ARU purpose, or additional residential unit purpose. But it does provide amenity space for storage and other things.
Thank you.
Anything further? Okay, we have a recommendation then before us for this minor variance to be granted subject to the following conditions or the conditions on the condition sheet. I'd ask for a mover and a seconder. I'll look moved by maybe one of you that's zooming in. Anybody? Okay, moved by Councillor Stack, seconded by Nancy Darlington Smith. I'll read the conditions and then we can have any further discussion and then take the vote. Minor variance application A-2023-012 is hereby granted subject to the following conditions. They are: number one, that any future development on the property conforms to the provisions of the zoning bylaw. Number two, that the decision applies only to the proposed development as indicated on Schedule A attached to and forming part of this decision. And number three, that the maximum permitted height for an accessory structure is to be 6.7 meters. Are there any further comments? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That carries. Okay, we've come down to the end of our agenda. 7.1 on the agenda indicates that the next meeting is planned for May the 15th, 2023. I've been asked to indicate to members that there is the potential for 2 meetings during May. The second one being contemplated would be on Tuesday, May the 23rd. And that will be dependent, I believe, on the volume of applications that are ready to go. So, just keep the second date in mind. May the 15th is the regularly scheduled one, and that is a Monday. And the second potential date being talked about is May the 23rd, which is a Tuesday. The time would be the same. So now I would ask for an adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Member Zimmerman, seconded by Councillor Stack. So I now do say that the meeting is adjourned at 5:54 p.m. Thank you very much for attending.